Thank you for joining us on Searching for Answers. If you'll get your Bibles, we're still in the book of John, and I think it's John 8 that we're going to be starting. And so on my right is
Richard Rice, School of Religion, Loma Linda University.
And John Jones, the School of Religion, La Sierra University.
John Brunt, the Azure Hills Church.
Michael Connect, Loma Linda University Medical Center.
And I think I'm going to ask my very good friend, John Jones, to start with chapter 8 in the book of John and explain to us some things that are a little bit different.
Well, we'll start with reading and see about that explanation later. But it is a piece that kind of stands alone here, an insertion, which really, if you want to, you can start with 753, everybody went home. Each went to their own homes. But that seems to belong to the story that we're about to read.
Yes.
Because when we pick up in verse 12, Jesus is back together with these people and the Pharisees, and the debate goes on. So here's this little gem of a story set right in here. We don't need to say too much about its textual history except to say that the earliest and best manuscripts do not have this story, or at least do not have it in this location. Nonetheless, it deserves a place in the Bible, and I think we all agree that we're glad it's here. They each went to their own homes, and then picking up with 8:1, Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. And early in the morning he returned to the temple, and all the people gathered around him, and he sat down and taught them. The legal experts and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery. Placing her in the center of the group, they said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of committing adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone women like this. What do you say?" Now, they said this to test him because they wanted a reason to bring an accusation against him. That is one of John's famous little parenthetical explanations off to the side. Resuming the story now, in the second half of verse 6, we're told that Jesus bent down and wrote on the ground with his finger. And they continued to question him. And so he stood up and replied, "Whoever hasn't sinned should throw the first stone." And bending down again, he wrote on the ground, and those who heard him went away one by one, beginning with the elders. Finally, only Jesus and the woman were left in the middle of the crowd, and Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Is there no one to condemn you?" She said, "No one, sir," or Lord. And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go. From now on, don't sin anymore." There it is.
Beautiful. Beautiful story. I should think that that would give a lot of hope to a lot of women who maybe tend to have that kind of a life.
I think that's why it's here.
I do too. I really do.
There are several things to note, aren't there, along the way here. First of all, it takes two to tango, and I think it did even back in those days, right? So you can read in the Talmud that in such a situation, both parties must be judged and condemned. Otherwise, you have to have 3 witnesses, and when can you imagine a situation like that? So effectively, we don't believe that this was ever carried out very often, but the mystery is, how did this happen, and what became of the other half of the twosome here? There's that. When Jesus bends down to write on the ground with his finger, we are probably intended to envision him and her at eye level. It's not explicit, but we can imagine that she is thrown down at his feet.
Yes.
And that by getting down at her level, he places himself visually on her side of the situation. It is certainly symbolic because she is oppressed, and he will join the oppressed person at that level. A very, very interesting thing. Well, pick up on that, Rick.
If unless I'm mistaken, this is the only incident where Jesus writes
Yes.
in the Gospels. So why they left one by one in the order they did, from the oldest to the youngest, has given rise to the suggestion or the conjecture that Jesus was writing the things of which they were guilty. So in other words, doesn't it say, let him who is without guilt cast the first stone?
Yes.
So Jesus is saying, now wait a minute, when it comes to guilt, guilty and innocent, let's sort of, let's divide the crowd up, okay? And as it turns out, they had their own things to be embarrassed about. Is that just a conjecture, or is that a pretty good implication, a pretty good conclusion as to what Jesus is doing here?
Well,
What do you
they were
think?
trying to trap Jesus, number one.
Mm-hmm.
Because the feeling against those kind of women in that day was they had no use for them.
Well, yeah, that is a sad commentary about
Yeah.
the way in which they were just using a person,
Exactly.
particularly a woman, without any real regard for her and her situation, but just to make a point.
Yeah.
I mean, here they
Yeah.
were willing, I don't know if it would have gone so far as to actually stone her, but they were willing to simply use her and publicly humiliate her just to, for their own
Catch him.
political purposes.
We've got something on Jesus now. We know how we feel about this sort of thing, and we'll trap him. We've got him this time. There's no way he can get out of this.
And he
Right?
did.
And he did.
He did.
And he did. Bless his heart.
Well, in answer to your question, Rick, it seems to me that that's a very good guess, that there's no way of proving it. It is conjecture, it's speculation, but it makes sense.
It is an early tradition in the church. The attempt is to trap Jesus.
That's right.
But right now, at the middle of the story, it's the woman who's trapped, isn't it? Yeah. And women often were. And it has happened many times since. Interestingly enough, the stipulation in a trial on a capital case, when someone is to be executed, in the Sanhedrin, the stipulation was when it came time for the vote, they would vote in a certain sequence, from the youngest to the eldest, so that new members would not be influenced by the vote of the elders.
Isn't that interesting?
But here it's reversed. The elders leave one by one, beginning with the eldest. Yeah, isn't that interesting? And it may imply, Rick, that they indeed had reason to peel off at this point.
Yes.
And I would tend to agree with that, obviously. But I also wonder, is there room for an interpretation where, because verse 9 says when the accusers heard this, it doesn't say when they read this. It doesn't say about them reading, but when they heard this, that who's without sin, could it be in the portrait you painted where he stoops down, he's at her eye level, was he writing something to her? Could he have been writing a message just for her? Could he have been quoting from the Old Testament, writing a verse in the sand? But I've wondered. I mean, I have no basis for that.
That's interesting. My hunch is that he was talking while he wrote, because the idea of reading silently and perhaps even writing silently
People didn't
is
do that.
relatively modern. We know in the ancient world when people read, they read out loud.
Yes.
So my guess is, Michael, that he's a little like a teacher on a board who wants to keep the students' attention. You say it as you write it because you don't want to lose anybody in the back row. I mean, don't we tend to do this at times? So that's kind of my guess, that he is he's repeating it and maybe writing it for emphasis to show.
Yeah.
And of course, it would have been what, right to left? Sorry about that. And so that's another possibility. But maybe just emphasizing, I'm not only going to say it, I'm going to write it. And when they hear it,
But I like that picture you paint of Jesus going to her
that
eye
is a
level.
beautiful picture.
Yes.
Because he could have just said it standing, but
Yeah.
he comes next to her.
Gets down and says,
It's like the Psalms 23, when you go through the valley, the shadow valley of death, I'm there beside you. And there's that picture of Jesus coming beside her.
Yeah.
that is
yeah.
it's a beautiful scene.
The thing that I don't understand, why did her accusers start leaving one by one? Do you think he named them, or
Well,
he was
probably
reading
didn't
it
have
out
to.
loud?
He probably
He was out loud. What was
he simply identified what they were guilty of.
Yeah, but
There's someone in this group who,
yeah,
okay, I think,
and one by
it's
one
time for
they
me
left.
to kind of get out
Yeah.
of the picture here.
That's right.
And of course, the test here, the fact that they thought they had him either way, if he said, "Oh no, don't stone her,"
Yeah,
why then he'd be going against the law.
that's right.
But if he goes ahead and does it, they really didn't carry this out, and
No.
it would have been a big, probably riot that ensued, or at least a very notorious incident that Roman soldiers looking on would have probably not appreciated.
It's a way to get the people, the ordinary, common people, aligned with them. Because she is one of them. And we've just had, I mean, this is amazing at the end of chapter 7. These authorities really put down the guards and they say, are you as bad as these other unlettered people who don't know anything? They themselves are under God's curse. So the authorities don't think much of the people of the land, as they
That's
call
right.
them, and we're rather dismissive of them. That creates a rift. Now, if indeed they are to carry out at Jesus' warrant this sentence, it will align the people with them, because they will be angry with Jesus for calling for this death of this poor woman. They may not have had a lot of sympathy for her, but she was one of them, in a sense. Just
Well, I think that John has it right. I think they probably threw her.
oh yeah.
And
Oh,
so
yeah.
when they all disappeared,
She was half down already. They dragged her.
Yeah.
Sorry to put it so graphically, but yeah.
but when they all left and he talked to her, do you see him helping her up and saying, "Now go and sin no more"?
I think another thing that's so interesting here is that Jesus never says something like, look, forget the law, we're not worried about that, doesn't apply. Somehow he always finds an interpretation that, shall we say, trumps theirs. Okay? They come in,
Exactly.
this is what the law says, what do you say?
Yeah.
Are we going to do it or not? And he says, well, let's take another look at the law. Doesn't the law say, let the one who is without guilt cast the first stone? I mean, if you're committed to keeping the law, let's just take a closer look at
Yeah.
it, and then lo and behold, doesn't work out their way. I mean, it's kind of a marvelous rabbinic interpretation.
Yes, it is.
He shows a tremendous grasp of, well, not only human nature, but the law and how to interpret it. So it never works out quite the way they think it's going to. They intend to use it, and it backfires on them, because now there's an element in the law that doesn't work to their advantage at all.
That's
Now it's
right.
working
That's
at
right.
guess
You know.
guess who the villains are now. Now, I don't know. Is this?
Yes.
It's cavalier to say it's one-upmanship, because I don't think Jesus is just trying to
but he
use the
could
law.
play their game. He could play their
And
game
he
on their
showed that
terms.
their commitment to the law
Yeah.
was not as profound
Yeah.
as they pretended it was. And he was able to interpret the law in ways that showed there was a deeper purpose here. And for me, it's wonderful at the end. He says, look, I'm not in the condemning business. I love the second greatest verse in the Bible, in a sense, I think, is John 3:17, where after
Yeah.
that great affirmation of God's love, it says, God didn't send his son into the world to condemn the world. So throughout, where Jesus could have been making that his major objective, he was not trying to condemn anybody. He was trying to give a more profound interpretation of what the whole plan of salvation was about, and that was to bring people out of sin, not to condemn them in their sin.
Yeah.
And this, I think this story is a sort of a beautiful way of emphasizing that.
And I think a good point is as we go through and we study the scripture, that we don't keep it at arm's length.
Yeah.
But we take from it that maybe I shouldn't be too quick to condemn.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's easy for us to always point out the wrong in others, and we can quickly go there, but to give pause and say, wait a minute, who says I'm not without sin? And
Yeah.
so to always in our study of scripture, just to not keep it too far from us, but actually shines a light on us.
That's right. And you wonder whatever happened to her. Hopefully this is a real story, since it's mentioned more than once in the Bible. Did she go back and change her life? Did she go back?
Well, that makes the best story, I
Yeah.
think. In fact, you wonder if maybe later on she's a member of the Christian communities and people are telling the story, and she has an inner satisfaction here.
Yeah.
Guess what? My story is really, but is not about to stand up and say, I was that woman. I don't know. This is probably not the sort
Yeah.
of thing where you'd want to claim ownership. But I'm just running with my imagination
don't
here.
know.
I've got
Yeah.
no idea. Yeah.
But
Well,
yes, it could very well be.
Could be.
It could
Yeah.
be. And I think she was a young girl. And, but anyway,
Quite
maybe
possibly.
we'll find out when we get to
I don't know,
heaven.
the
She
woman
may
at the-
be there.
The woman at the well went into town and said, he told me everything I ever
did.
And evidently there was quite a lot to tell. And she was happy to own up because
Yeah.
they all knew of her
That's right.
situation. So perhaps this
But
woman
he was kind to her, too.
Yes, he was.
So,
Yeah, so
anyway.
I think the way Jesus treats women is a good example, especially women in dire straits,
Yeah.
is a wonderful illustration of his reaching out to those who are marginalized by their society, condemned by conventional moral standards. And he's saying there is a place for you in the kingdom. And I'm not one of those who's pushing you out. I want to bring you in.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful story.
In that society, it would have been so easy for the early Christians to have just kind of let this fall by the wayside. Let this story fall away. It was an embarrassment. It was awkward. And I think that it's a testimony to the church's faithfulness in its memory, those early communities in their memory of Jesus, that even though there was a bit of rolling of the eyes and wringing of the hands, so to speak, nonetheless they preserved the story. They kept
Yes.
it alive. So
They did.
Well, there's one thing about this story. I've never heard anybody say, nah, Jesus wouldn't have done that. That wasn't like
No.
Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the
Never.
ring. I mean, you read this, you say, well, of course. That's exactly,
Exactly
what he would have done.
do.
You know.
That's right.
That's
You're right.
perfect.
Well, I think it's a sweet story, and I hope that the girl went on to change her life, and maybe she'll be in heaven, and she can tell us firsthand all about it and what happened to her and how many people she influenced and so forth. But there I go again with my putting flesh and blood on the story
Well,
when it doesn't go that far, does it?
Well, what we do know, in a sense, if we're looking for an after story, there is this. We don't know about the players within the narrative, but we do know that outside of the narrative, among people who are not necessarily Christians or believers in Christ, this story is one that grabs them. Whether they be Hindus, Confucianists, Muslims love this
Oh,
story.
yes.
I think that alone says something about
do
the
too.
after story,
Yes.
in a sense.
That's right.
So it has a transcultural
It
appeal.
really does. There's a profound, deeply
A young woman in
human
trouble
story. Yes.
and somebody who cares enough
Enough
to
to-
reach out
Rescue her.
again,
Yeah. Okay. Shall we go on?
Okay.
if we have to. It's such a great story. It's such a great story, you know. You
It
can,
is. I agree with you.
It's so inspiring.
All right, Michael.
Yes.
I don't know where we are.
Well, should I pick up verse 12 or?
Sure.
All right. Jesus spoke to the people once more and said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness because you will have the light that leads to life. Pharisees replied, you are making those claims about yourself. Such testimony is not valid. Jesus told them, these claims are valid even though I make them about myself, for I know where I came from and where I am going. But you don't know this about me. You judge me by human standards, but I do not judge anyone. And if I did, my judgment would be correct in every respect because I am not alone. The Father who sent me is with me. Your own law says that if two people agree about something, their witness is accepted as fact. I am one witness, and my Father who sent me is the other. Where is your Father? They asked. Jesus answered, since you don't know who I am, you don't know who my Father is. If you knew me, you would also know my Father. Jesus made these statements while he was teaching in the section of the temple known as the treasury, but he was not arrested because his time had not yet come.
Okay, let me read it from the Good News Bible. Okay, this is chapter 8, verse 12. Jesus spoke to the Pharisees again. I am the light of the world, he said. Whoever follows me will have the light of life and will never walk in darkness. Remember, this is the Good News Bible. I want to stress that again. Mm-hmm. The Pharisees said to him, now you are testifying on your own behalf. What you say proves nothing. No, Jesus answered. Even though I do testify on my own behalf, what I say is true, because I know where I came from and where I am going. You do not know where I came from or where I am going. You make judgments in a purely human way. I pass judgment on no one. See, there it is. I judge no one. Beautiful. But if I were to do so, my judgment would be true, because I am not alone in this. The Father who sent me is with me. It is written in your law that when two witnesses agree, what they say is true. I testify on my own behalf, and the Father who sent me also testifies on my behalf. Where is your Father? They asked him. You know neither me nor my Father, Jesus answered. If you knew me, you would know my Father also. Jesus said all this as he taught in the temple, in the room where the offering boxes were placed, and no one arrested him because his hour had not come. It's a beautiful story.
I've always had a question here on the significance of naming the treasury or the offering room. Why does that detail, does it matter? Do we know much about that, or?
Is that where the woman dropped her penny?
I don't know.
I wondered when I read where it was, what was he doing in there? What was he doing in the temple in the treasury department?
I don't know enough about the architecture of the ancient temple precincts to
He was part of
give a lot of attention.
the court of the Gentiles. So
Oh, it was,
would have been
okay.
on the.
So anybody was able to give. Is that right? You're a Pastor John. Is
That works. That's right.
That's right. Yeah, this church is open to every donor. Is that? Well,
Why
I
not?
think our university is the same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, all donors invited. But
Yes.
I don't know. It's just a nice touch that
It
you've got
is.
detail. You know, I think these details, whether or not we read a lot of significance in them, just remind us that this is this is a place. These things actually happened. It gives the aura of historical reality to it.
I think so
that
too.
Jesus is teaching that.
I think
There's some
so, too.
interesting themes here. I think Jesus' relation to his Father is central to his identity. And the fact, in many ways, that the Father's identity and Jesus' identity are what we might call reciprocal. In other words, Jesus is the one who is sent by the Father. The Father is the one who has sent Jesus, and we know the Father because we know Jesus. Because later on, Jesus will say, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So there's in a way, you don't understand either one without the other, and the identity of the one becomes the clue to the other. And then you've got this sort of movement, where I'm from and where I'm going. So I wonder if that isn't reflecting something that one of you said earlier, that this is written from the perspective of people looking back and realizing Jesus is not with us now, but it's because he's gone to his Father.
Yeah.
And it's their relationship that really is the guiding motive or the guiding momentum of this whole story.
Of
It's
the whole
because
book of
the whole
John.
book, because
Exactly.
it's fulfilling his Father's will.
Exactly.
It's the hour is shall we say, is going to be determined by his Father.
Yeah.
And so those elements are kind of brought together here in this encounter of Jesus with his, with his questioners and his opponents there.
And he's not bashful about telling him where he's from. He does it in a nice way, except that one time when he got up was shouting. But even so, he had a reason to do that.
And yet this whole attempt to communicate his identity is taking place within a whole atmosphere of incomprehension.
Yeah.
His opponents really don't understand what's
No.
going on, nor do his followers.
Except the temple guards, they got it.
Well, yeah. They knew that he was different.
Yeah.
This is no rabble rouser that you
When
sent
the
us to.
Pharisees, you grab him and bring him to us. And,
Yeah, it was like,
what did you do? Where is he? Well, no man ever spoke.
this
like
is not your ordinary suspect, right?
No, that's right. That's right.
There's a disturbance in the corner of the temple. We'll take care of it. And they come back and said, this
Where is
isn't like
he?
any of the other jobs
Yeah.
we've been sent on.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you know why the book of John is, I wouldn't say the best or the most favorite book in the Bible, but it certainly is a favorite of many people
Yes.
because it gives them hope. Because Jesus is so kind and tender to the people who don't know everything that the Pharisees know, but he understands those who haven't had a great education in some aspects, and I think that we can illustrate that by our study of the book of John and the things that he does, the people he's healed, the instruction he's given them. He's talked to people and said, if you knew where I came from, you know where I'm going, and he tries to explain it. And yet the Pharisees, some believe, but when he got that far, they started leaving him. And he said to his disciples, are you going to leave me too? And Peter, isn't he the one said, where would we go, Lord? So it's a great story if you just put it all in context and just kind of dwell on what he's trying to tell his believers. And it's good for us in this day and age too. All right, now we're through with our segment. We only have a few seconds left. Study the book of John and try to understand what Jesus is trying to tell us.